Chapter 2. The Ostentatious Cripples. The predators. Their first appearance among us was that of beggars. Haggard they came, betrayed and lonely in their hunger of soul and body. We pitied them, for is it not a part of the way that the stranger shall be given sustenance and helped along his road? But the way is not a partial remembrance only. How was it forgotten then, that it is also a part of the way, inseparable from every other part, that the guest who turns contemptuous is a guest no longer, but a parasite? How was it forgotten that hosts who spread a welcome mat for parasites prepare their own destruction? None among our rememberers have ever sought to claim the first predatory attack. Could not have been foreseen. True, the attackers had come as beggars, but time had passed. The wounds the beggars had come trailing on their bodies, the wounds afflicting their remnant spirits, we had healed for them. Under our healing, they turned parasites, yet still, in the ease of our reciprocity, we did not even think to throw them out. They grew yet stronger, and in the fullness of their strength, turned sudden predators against an easy host. 30 days of unrelenting massacre brought them the fruit they sought. The power of new masters over their old hosts. Fear was the mother of the predator's first empire over us. The constant threat of murder in the course of time cowed all but the most determined of our men, those who chose the lonely life of hunters in the grasslands. Our women, the predators from the desert, turned into playthings for their decayed pleasure, and our women, they endured, acquiesced in the predators' orgies so uncomplainingly that in a time a profound confidence drew the predators to them. Came a Ramadan, the predators' season of hypocritical self-denial. Followed the time they called the Id, time of the new moon of their new year. After a month of public piety, abstinence, the predators again threw themselves into their accustomed orgies of food, of drugs, and of sex. Of these orgies, we remember the greatest, and for those particular predators, the last. That night was a dark night, for in truth, the moon was not really out. The predators, in their haste to begin their orgy, cheated their god himself. Our women gave the predators an overflowing measure of joy, filled them with such exquisite happiness, their senses grew overloaded, and pleasure turned them dumb, insensate. Outside stood the Askaris, zombies, kept to guard the predators, destroyers of our people. This night, the Askaris' minds held nothing of the apprehension of revolt. Their masters had given them the strictest orders on no account to interrupt the revelry within their monstrous palace. The Askaris had no intention to disobey their masters. They, too, felt something of the predators' appreciation for the beauty of our women. For at frequent intervals, in the course of the great feast, as in the course of others before, our women sent the Askaris loving gifts of food, taken from the abundance within the palace. 12 dripping lambs, freshly taken from their frying fat, spiced hollow yams, 7 whole cows, turned 2 days and nights over slow fires, with only the liver, heart, the kidneys, brains, and thigh meat taken from each beast. Of the drink, the Askaris received an even greater sufficiency, for a little was all that was needed to make the predators themselves stupid with happiness uncontainable. But even more than food and drink that night, our women in their kindness filled the Askaris with their favorite stupefyant, the oversweet dawa drug. In the course of the maturing night, therefore, not one Askari was sure whether the noises in the air came from the palace, the town itself, forgetting distance, and was too cowed this season for any noise, or from the lurid dance of the Dawa in their blood within their brains. At any rate, they had their instructions not to disturb their masters, the predators' revelry. Noises made by the predators from the deserts in their bouts of manic happiness had always been strange to us. This night of nights, the noises they made were stranger still. Outside the palace, many a Skari knew momentary panic, wondering if the grunts, the howls, if these shrieks puncturing the air with such accelerating frequency were truly cries of beings possessed with nothing different from joy. Inside the palace, our women themselves, eating little, touching no drink but water, at which abstinence the Arab predators laughed frequently and long, plied the bloat-eyed revelers with the swollen quantities of the tastiest, spiciest food. Great was the pleasure of these lucky Arab predators, as with extended tongue they vied to see who could, with the greatest ease, scoop out buttered dates stuck cunningly into the genitals of our women, lined up for just this, their peasant competition. From the same fragrant vessels, they preferred the eating of other delicious food, meatballs, still warm off the fire, their heat making our women squirm with a sensuousness all the more inflammatory to the predator's desire. The dawa drug itself, the predators licked lovingly from the youngest virgin genitals, licked with a furious appetite. Eunuchs they had brought with them played them their strange, nerve-eating music, sending the predators into trances without bottom. This was the time when a corrosive lust for our women possessed them, and in a concerted movement, the predators sought sexual entry into the same genitals they had so recently eaten food and licked their dower from. Our women watched them with care, and noticed that this languid lust of happy predators was a lust unsupported by any potency. For in truth, at that time, the predators did not even know where on their bodies their own genitals were. So deeply had excess food and wild madness of the dawa invaded their blood, their brains. Our women watched the predators in their fumbling ecstasy. How many, so many of these predators from the desert died that beautiful night of blackness. Who asked to hear the mention of the predators' names? Who would hear again the cursed names of the predator chief? With which stinking name shall we begin? Hussein, twin brother of Hassan the Syphilitic. Hussein had long since given up the attempt to find a way for his phallus into any woman's genitals. His tongue was always the truest pathfinder. So after moving with the others in the forgetfulness of a momentary genital enthusiasm, he had returned to eating buttered dates into his bursting paunch. Buttered dates mined from 3 women's holes in turn. By the 3rd round, the circuit was making Hussein dizzy. The 3rd woman, therefore, held Hussein's head in a tender caress. The 2nd, in a gesture full of love, stuck a smooth, solid, well-honed knife into Hussein's neck and a soft space between the cowries of his spine. The 1st woman stroked the disjointed head with affection, pressing it firmly down so the first hoarse cry from the throat came out a muffled sound of happy lechery. Then the 1st woman raised the head gently to give the warm blood way in its quiet flowing from the predator's open mouth. On Hussein's face, in the soft, dark light of the palace, the 3 women discerned a kind of smile of surprise. That devout Muslim accomplished one miracle even as he died. He swallowed the 9th date of his 3 circuits before he went to embrace his slave-owner God. He did not allow his blood to wash it away. Faisal, he, the only one this night, had insisted on having his favorite Askari with him inside the palace this night. Not indeed for the Askari's normal duties of defense against justice armed, but for reasons even sweeter to the predator's lechery. Most of the night, Faisal had spent happily licking his young Askari with not one thought of females. But at the climax of the Dawa's work on his brain, he too, from some deep bottom of his being, felt like a man and yelled the desire was upon him. His shout was peremptory. What he wanted above all else was a black woman there and then. Faisal sang that night. Laughing, he sang. The words, what were they but a demented Arab praise song to black bodies? The lyrics were a confession Faisal was to make, having lost control of the last remnants of his will, a confession that all his religious stories of odalisques and other little white virgins were fantasies for weak, crippled minds, with little of the power of imagination and no knowledge at all of real truth. Faisal beckoned to the black woman of his dreams. Beautiful as a walking dream, Azania went to the Arab Faisal, and he screamed his incredulous delight at her being real. Azania welcomed the predator Faisal, welcomed him with exquisitely knowing caresses, prepared him for love, and then took him in spite of all his fumbling, took him into herself, and moved under him with a smooth grace that gave him his first ecstasy with a female. But Faisal, it had not been his intention to orgate into Azania all by himself. He wanted his young Askari in him, from behind, while Azania welcomed him inside herself, so that he would himself be firmly clasped between his lower and his higher joys. So the scream that forced its way out of Faisal's mouth's throat during his first ecstasy was not Azania's name, but the young Askari's. This was not the first, not the 30th, not the 1,000th time that the zombie had heard his name shouted with such loud desire. He strode forward at the urgent call and in a moment was naked upon his master's back, plowing the predator's open asshole, while the master tried to keep his forgetful penis in Azania. Then the joy of having his Askari mount him overwhelmed all Faisal's senses. For long moments he lay insensate, hardly breathing. By the degrees, he lost all semblance of his former grip on Azania's body, and Azania herself, she slowly, lovingly, helped him slide off her. So gently she did not disturb him or the Askari pumping man-seed into his Arab master. Azania did not have to use the dagger she had hidden in the cushions to which the predator Faisal was now clinging. The young Askari had brought a sharp war spear with him, even to this feast. Great is the force of habit. Azania took the spear and pushed it with the energy of seasons and seasons of hatred shown only as love. Pushed it hard through the Askari's right side, so hard it went through him into the Arab, panting beneath, threading him also in his right. The two, the predator and the Askari, were thus fused together when the agony of death usurped their sweeter pain. Mohammed, the Sheikh Mohammed, brother of Shakbut, each woman, so commanded, stroked the licking tongue, the neck, the back of Muhammad's head. Sakila, she stroked the expectant tongue with a thin, sharp knife. The tongue curled around this last morsel of spiced meat, dropped just in front of Muhammad's mouth. Too amazed to feel the still imminent pain, the Arab was staring dumbfounded at his severed tongue, when a sharper knife, held in Naiweli's hands, slid deep into his neck and was jerked sideways to the left, sideways to the right. Muhammad died with his forehead stuck to the floor, like every good man of his enslaver's faith. Hassan had lived under a terrifying anxiety all his life, the fear that he might chance to live through one day and leave some new carnal pleasure unexamined. This night of nights, he ordered 6 women to prepare themselves for him. They did. When the dawah he had eaten reached his brain, what Hassan wanted was one woman, fat and greased with perfumed unctions, under his body for his penis. A second woman, Hassan was not particular as to her size, or indeed as to the size of any of the five apart from the favorite under him. Sat in front of his head, to one side of the fat one, and welcomed Hassan's tongue and teeth, sucking at her genitals. The third and the fourth women, they sat to the left and right of his body. Their instructions were to take his fingers, groping in their woman parts, or his thumbs, if that was his fancy, at any moment, and rhythmically contract and relax their parts around them for his pleasure throughout the night. The fifth and sixth were given a similar occupation, except that of his fingers and thumbs they received Hassan's toes, famous toes, for who did not know their overgrown nails were separated from their bulbous flesh, and a third of their ample length by sacred dirt. This is how Hassan died. At the height of his oblivious joy, a seventh woman, unknown to him but known to the other six, had brought a horn holed at its small end, as well as the large, and inserted the small end into the Arab's rectum. Hassan was overjoyed. A torrent of thanks and praises was pouring out of his mouth, directed toward the slave owner, benefactor God, who had so thoughtfully provided such exquisite means to the completion of his pleasure when he felt something extra reach the lining of his rectum. It was honey mixed with lamp oil, the mixture heated past boiling. Hassan's unforeseen benefactress poured an overflowing measure of the sweet liquid into his ass. To the end, the other six women did not deny him one little scratch of pleasure. Hassan screamed, but this night of nights, screams did not alarm the listeners, for it was Hassan's habit. It was their habit, all these predators from the desert, to scream with immense conviction whenever he approached an orgasm. The greater the joy, the louder the noise. Outside, the Askaris heard him. If they had thought anything at all of it, it was that this must be for Hassan a night of pleasure better than any he had ever known. A lucky night. How many died quieter deaths that night with daggers stuck in their throats? How many tried to vomit poison and found it already tied to their stomachs and turned the sinews of their throats rigid with swift action? 30. There rolled in the agony of murderers, finally trapped by their executioners. Here, another 30 lay forever silent in their blood. Over there lay 30 more, covered in the final glory of their vomit. Another 30 swam to meet their slave-owning God, swam in a viscous paste of shit and their own slimy urine. Near the end, 7 predators burned together, sewed in the sheets of cloth upon which they had stretched their bodies in the expectation of unwanted entertainment. Gut mean for making music, tightened in the hands of our women around the necks of predators and strangled them. But who craves more attention of their filthy names? Of our women, 15 died that night, murdered by stupefied Askaris. How? Why did these liberating women die? Outside the palace, the Askaris, drugged with dawa, as they were, still in the end, began to have their doubts concerning the nature of the sounds coming from within the palace. Yet they could do nothing. Strict were their instructions, keen their fear of the predator's vindictiveness. The yells and screams from within the palace may not have been unusual, except for their intensity this night, but after they had all died down, the silence was decidedly uncanny. The Askaris were used to the larger noises of the predators climaxing, subsiding into smaller snorts and groans, the normal, easy noises of the predator's most peaceful rest. But now this silence was eerie. Singly at first, and circumspectly, a few Askaris ventured past the palace walls, peered trembling into the hollow dimness within. One, struck finally by the truth's immensity, howled his alarm, and brought the other zombies rushing into the dark interior of the palace. The Askaris saw their masters not in repose at the pleasure, but in death's final quiet. Conditioned to their work of killing, the Askaris at once began an assault on our women. Now the wailing of the women brought everybody running from the town. Even the hunters came desperate from their secrecy in the grasslands, bringing bows and arrows. The oldest women, coming from the nearest houses, were the first to arrive. The very oldest, Nandi was her name, threw herself in the path of the slaughtering zombies. She was the grandmother of the killer's leader, and so her sudden appearance there in all that blood, naked in her hurry, for a moment caused the Askaris to halt. Nandi looked around the palace yard, saw the women trying to defend themselves, a couple of their bodies already past defense, and the Askaris ready to leap again at them. "But for whom are you fighting still?" Nandi asked the Askaris. She saw her grandson. "Son of my daughter, whose work are you doing? Look, those who turned you killer, where are they? Look at them. That should have been your work, killing your people's killers, destroying your people's destroyers. You did not do it, the work of your life. Instead, you chose the work of walking corpses, killing your own people. What could we say to you? We knew your masters. They would have screamed at you to kill us all, and you would have obeyed them. But look now, there your masters lie. You can give them your obedience no more. They have been past its use. For whom are you still killing your people? Son of my daughter. For whom?" The Askari zombie leader did not answer. On his face, a look of terror, hate, despair, loss. A look as of one plunged, unprepared, into vertiginous motion. A shout followed, in the predator's language, Arabic. Then the zombies rushed again. First, their leader killed his grandmother Nandi. 12 more fell that night. It was the arrival of the hunters from the grasslands that brought the carnage to a stop. The hunters' fortune was good in this auspicious night. They made no speeches, but struck immediately, destroying the most desperate of the zombies, turned into wild, inefficient fighters by too much dawa in their brain. The remaining Askaris, more than half, the hunters working together with the smiths, disarmed. A time of pain followed, a time of attempts to understand the things that had happened. Painful was the groping after lost reciprocity. Fertile had been the rule of women, but its fruit had been a forgetfulness of our own defense. The rule of men, of any desire for that recent cascade of disasters had cured us. We thought to find new paths to the ancient, abandoned way of reciprocity, the way ignorant of women ruling men, knowing nothing of men dominating women. But we were dazed still. Our thoughts were not yet keen enough to cut the roots of the schism. Against the inner causes helping our destruction, against the uncreative splitting of our people, against the turning of one half against its twin, against all this, we had lost all sure defense. Here, too, lay the beginning of our long bafflement at the heavy phenomenon of the slave, forever conditioning against himself, against our people. With such, never will there be any possibility of creation. Never will new communities of the way be born in their presence. Such contain, even in times of liberation's sweetest possibility, an undying nostalgia for the worst time of the oppressor's domination over us. The times of suffering for the shattered community, because for such, those are times of ease, times of prestige, times of privilege. To such, the possibility itself of our liberation is a threat. Their lives in times of such possibility are long nightmares about their personal, precipitate descent from privilege. The events of our hope are to them real terrors. In their drugged moments of forgetfulness, they dream of days when they were elevated slaves, not ordinary persons holding their own lives, their own futures together with our people. In liberation's time, the torpid forgetfulness brought to them by drugs alternates with a waking existence of catatonic despair. How were we then to know what to do with these zombies? We left them in peace, a generosity we live to regret. Some the luckier predators took with them in their escape back to the desert that had vomited them against us. Most never came back, but a few returned, a return heavy with disaster. Among the returners, one, perhaps two, saw in what had happened to their lives a terrible nightmare. These sought a healing reinsertion among the people they had betrayed, hard as that was. But others, without the honesty of heart to admit they had been used for evil purposes, pretended their trips abroad had been an initiation into something so great it set them above the rest of us. A few came claiming to have been the beneficiaries of wonderful kindnesses. On closer scrutiny, these turned out to have been ill used as servants in the predators' homes. Yet now, after their arrival, their intention was to veil over their despair by giving their particular enslavement a legendary glory. They were ignored. Among them, the heaviest was a man who came back old and blind, his soul filled with bizarre mumblings about the predator's prophet, he whose creed centered on the strange necessity for everyone to be a slave. This man, Abdallah was his name. He brought his wild message to us, shrieking dementedly, "Turn slaves or perish." Others there were like him, although with neither his insistence nor his zeal. We ignored them all, but the zombies, those whose brains still craved the master, listened to him. Listening, their wilted zombie hearts were once more filled in anticipation with the blood of victims, blood of our people. Abdallah, in time, gathered a band of these perennial slaves around himself, charged them with a fanatical reinterpretation of everything around them. Then he unleashed them against us. Heavy, heavy is our remembrance. Long our dispersal from our way, the way. But memory now flies faster than the utterer's tongue, and it is time to heed the quiet call, the call to return. To return, the roots of schism grew in neglected soil. Who would have thought in times of the way, or even in the fertile time, who would have thought the infirmity of individual cripples could ever carry danger against our entire people? Infirmity, then, was a felt diminution, not merely of the single stricken self, but of the whole. What need, then, had any cripple for dreams of vengeance? But the change that began with the turning of our leaders into single peacocks, strutting against each other's splendor, broke the individual's cripples' connectedness, and threw him, impotent, against the shrunken group at home, the invidious family, resentful of any loss of strength. Why, after that, should the cripple acquiesce in silent suffering? Why, when ostentation had become the disease devouring a people, should not the most infirm self-protection embrace the new contagion with the most triumphant eagerness? What wonder that we spawned Bokassa, Togbi, Budu, Sinho, and a brood of other cripples, rivaling even the brilliant sun of the day in garish ostentation? There were others, a perfect complement to these ostentatious cripples. These were the Ascaris. But how shall we explain their disease? Let sleep and death again give us an image. The mind, that is the soul's conciliator with the body, the guide to keep the awakened body and the soul together. In sleep, in death, body and soul are apart. The body may fall victim to attack. The body may fall victim to an alien conqueror. The mind can also suffer attack. The mind can also fall to conquest. A mind attacked and conquered is guided easily away from the paths of its own soul. The body is then cut off from its spirit as in sleep, yet still instinct with the conqueror's imposed commands, a soulless thing, but active. In this state of soul death, the body blindly, sleepily obeys the conqueror. Such a body is said to persist in such obedience, even if its conqueror be a distance of days and days away, a time of seasons separate. Such are zombies, and among us, such were the Ascaris. Apart from the ostentatious cripples and the parasitic elders around them, people torn between a soured happiness at the oppressor's overthrow and chagrin that the methods and pleasures of their conquerors could not simply have gravitated to their own enjoyment. There were a few among us so lost in soul, men who found slavery so perfect for their spirit, the condition of having their people reduced to rubble by an alien power and themselves patronized, condescended to, protected, amid the insecurity of the general ruin, by the same power, crushing their people so sweet to their minds that after the revolt of the women, they lost their peace of mind and could only hope to retrieve it by following the retreating remnants of their masters. These lost souls went across the desert, chanting alien prayers like demented men. One fantastic quality they never lost: fidelity to those who spat on them. It was this quality that preserved them among their white masters in the desert, so after 40 seasons they were ready to return against us. They came back with minds somersaulting in the potency of religious madness, bursting with a zeal to impose on their people the slavery their conquerors had first forced upon themselves. For these people's destruction was for the predators not an end in itself, but a trial. After a success, the victims had one aim: to help destroy their people, forcing the yet undestroyed surroundings into unison with their lost selves. It is not that we did not see them. The cynical among us despised them openly, called them the white desert men's dogs, and treated them accordingly. But among us, the sentimental were many, and they pitied them. What none of us had any way of knowing, till it was too late, was that they were also a part of the prophecy unto us. For by themselves they were most pathetic. Yes, by themselves they were most pathetic. But they were not by themselves. The first attack of the predators from the desert had produced among us another breed of hangers-on. At any time, these would have been lazy, aimless ones, the kind of people whose indolence is not the wisdom of a weakened body seeking rest, but a matter of their innate character, the set of their minds being committedly away from any useful work. The predators from the desert, the white men, were not long in discovering in themselves a particular affinity for these creatures. The predators had a special use for them, and their souls a healthy dog would have vomited out of his body. Their souls were ready to accept such use. That use was this: the predators consistently reduced these men first to beasts, then to things. Beasts they could command, things they could manipulate, all in the increase of their power over us. To reduce them to beasts, the predators starved their minds. The predators lowered in number and in seriousness the matters that could cause these hangers-on to think, till in the end there was nothing at all they cared to exercise their minds on. To reduce them to things, the predators fed their bodies, indulging their crassest physical wants promptly, overflowingly. The predators fed them huge meals of meat and drink, and added abundant daga for their smoking. The predators supplied them with women, and watched their copulation as another kind of sport. Such was the Ascari's life. From morning till sleep, they were either at some sport, eating, drinking, copulating, smoking, or defecating. Their bodies having thus been used to draw them into a state of mindless physical strength, habit sufficed to turn the state itself into a purpose for these aimless creatures. The newfound aim of their lives was how to keep from doing anything different from the hollow cycle of shitting, smoking, fucking, drinking, eating, playing. The white predators, the desert men, whose presence among us had elevated these slugs into such ease, needed protection from us, their victims. Every season, every month, often every week, and sometimes every day. Those among us not made to be animals for others, things in the hands of our enemies, were trying ways to end our humiliation. Those with courage were finding ways to attack the attackers, ways to destroy the destroyers. It was the Ascari's violent job to kill off all caught trying to end our oppression. In this, the mindless ones were truly expert. To punish women caught plotting our freedom, they had a way of suspending their victims' naked bodies upon stakes, stooped with the thighs apart, then goading horses trained for the purpose to copulate with them. The bloody victims were left hanging a day and a night, a warning to the others. The Ascari zombies knew how to drive needles under fingernails of those suspected of harboring secret thoughts of our liberation, depending on the pain to loosen strong, unwilling tongues. On those they desired to silence forever, it was the sipo they used. They preferred it rusty, so that no matter how hard the torturer pushed it, it would not pierce the flesh cleanly, but tear its way in with the utmost difficulty. They drove the short arrow into the left cheek, rammed its 3 barbs into the tongue, and pushed it out through the right cheek until the leading barb emerged. The sipo was never removed. How would that have been done? Each victim, yet another warning unto us, was left to wander among us until his death. Among us, some, in spite of the plethora of warnings, laughed at the white predators from the desert. On such, the Ascaris performed their most restrained operation. They cut away the skin of their victim's upper lip and gave the wretch his freedom with the smiling injunction, "Continue laughing." Ha! There have been so many mutilated wandering among us, living witnesses to our impotence, a testimony to the oppressor's power to destroy us if we did not learn like dogs to love our own oppression. The Ascari's tasks were violent, brief, and safe. For them, there was no danger in all this killing. We were a disarmed people. Our destroyers, those who had disarmed us, had armed them. Still, there were times when the predator's listening ears would catch none of our living sounds. To their surprise, they were assaulted by the beautiful music of revolt. Then the Ascaris knew fear again. Then they killed not just for pleasure, but also for their useless lives. After each uprising, a wailing period intervened, a quiet time for the oppressors till our wounds were no longer raw. These were the times when the vigilance of the Ascaris brought them praise from our killers, their masters, and the things to put their minds to sleep, the things to flatter their bodies, the things to help their masters turn them into animals and things. These things increased. The Ascaris did their blood work well. After 100 seasons, we were so reduced, so abject had we become, that the destroyers feared no revolt, lost all suspicion of our humanity, could discern nothing of our destiny. After another 100 seasons, the destroyers from the desert thought we were born to slavery, not merely fallen into these pits through their greed and our own unwise generosity. For us, it was a time of bowing and smiling in the face of the things we hated. For the destroyers, it was a time of ceaseless self-gratulation, incessant feasting, an unending round of entertainments enjoyed at our expense, a childish euphoria created on our backs. After the revolt of the women in the harem and the overthrow of the destroyers that it brought, the discombobulation of the Ascaris was immense. Their masters executed by an avenging people, the few of them who, through some unlucky accident, happened to have been absent from their last celebration, having fled in panic back across the stony desert. Sandy womb, fit to vomit only such creatures, surrounded by a betrayed people, each with our specific slaughtered to remember and avenge. The Ascaris found themselves in a universe with no supporting place under their feet. They had been trained to commit crimes in defense of the predators. The predators were no longer here. But how profoundly the conquest had changed us, how far it had driven us from ourselves, how much farther it had pushed us from our way, the way. We had grown more than a little accustomed to being a people entirely disarmed, the only armed ones among us being the portion willing to be used against us. Now the Ascaris were shorn of their creature comforts, the clothes of their bloodwork taken from them, and burned with other rubbish, their weapons broken. Some fell to relatives of those they had murdered in their servile days of power. But pointless indeed has been all our generosity in our exile from the way. Many, too many, of the Ascaris were spared. Of those spared, half destroyed themselves. Fear and anxiety that some still hidden crime of theirs might be discovered yet led them first into madness, then into preemptive suicide. Their survivors, shunned by a people with too raw a memory of blood unjustly spilt, became a band apart. In sullen silences, they nursed a stubborn nostalgia for the greasy days of their crimes, unwilling, unable to turn human again, their souls forever set against us, their people, their spirits far, irretrievably far from the way, with every breath traveling farther. A death of the spirit was their life, catatonia, a pale suspicion of every living thing, an inability to release from its secrecy even one of their real desires. We thought the generations would change them. We thought as we healed ourselves from the wounds inflicted by them and their masters, and freed our tongues again to speak to those growing of times closer to the way, to speak in remembrance of those who, even in the recent heavy time, refusing to give up their arms and be turned into conquered things, chose to live the roaming life of hunters in the grasslands, hunting not only animals, but the oppressors, and also their Ascaris, and found an early death at the end of the Liberator's road. We thought because of the change we had wrought, they too, in coming generations, would cease transmitting their foolish, destructive dreams to their children and allow them to grow again together with us. We were too generous in our thoughts. The disappointed Ascaris cultivated secret wishes of destruction against us. These wishes they passed on to the first, the second, and third generation. Children walked among us, believing secretly there had been an age of giants and doers of great deeds now gone, and that those doers of great deeds had been their fathers' fathers. They heard secret, nostalgic tales of a time when a brave man had no need to do the careful, steady work of planting, watching, harvesting, but could, in one sudden, brilliant flash of violent energy, capture from others all the riches he craved, then, like a python, lie lazy through the length of coming seasons, consuming his victim's profit. Ah, that such unthinking ways could have power to lure so many people of our blood, we of the way itself. See, around us now, all the hurrying revelers running in directions just as bizarre, just as horrible, just as destructive. When the white predators from the desert came a second time, they found a brood of men ready to be tools of their purpose. This time again, the predators came with force to break our bodies. This time, they came with guile also, a religion to smash the feeblest minds among us, then turn them into tools against us all. The white men from the desert had made a discovery precious to predators and destroyers, the capture of the mind and the body, both as a slavery far longer lasting, far more secure than the conquest of bodies alone. Slavery, not merely falling into these pits through their greed and our own unwise generosity. For us, it was a time of bowing and smiling in the face of the things we hated. For the destroyers, it was a time of ceaseless self-gratulation, incessant feasting, an unending round of entertainments enjoyed at our expense, a childish euphoria created on our backs. After the revolt of the women in the harem and the overthrow of the destroyers that it brought, the discombobulation of the Askaris was immense. Their masters executed by an avenging people, the few of them who, through some unlucky accident, happened to have been absent from their last celebration, having fled in panic back across the stony desert. Sandy womb, fit to vomit only such creatures, surrounded by a betrayed people, each with our specific slaughtered to remember and avenge, the Askaris found themselves in a universe with no supporting place under their feet. They had been trained to commit crimes in defense of the predators. The predators were no longer here. But how profoundly the conquest had changed us, how far it had driven us from ourselves, how much farther it had pushed us from our way, the way. We had grown more than a little accustomed to being a people entirely disarmed, the only armed ones among us being the portion willing to be used against us. Now the Askaris were shorn of their creature comforts, the clothes of their bloodwork taken from them, and burned with other rubbish, their weapons broken. Some fell to relatives of those they had murdered in their servile days of power. But pointless indeed has been all our generosity in our exile from the way. Many, too many, of the Askaris were spared. Of those spared, half destroyed themselves. Fear and anxiety that some still hidden crime of theirs might be discovered yet led them first into madness, then into preemptive suicide. Their survivors, shunned by a people with too raw a memory of blood unjustly spilt, became a band apart. In sullen silences, they nursed a stubborn nostalgia for the greasy days of their crimes, unwilling, unable to turn human again, their souls forever set against us, their people, their spirits far, irretrievably far from the way, with every breath traveling farther. A death of the spirit was their life, catatonia, a pale suspicion of every living thing, an inability to release from its secrecy even one of their real desires. We thought the generations would change them. We thought as we healed ourselves from the wounds inflicted by them and their masters, and freed our tongues again to speak to those growing of times closer to the way, to speak in remembrance of those who, even in the recent heavy time, refusing to give up their arms and be turned into conquered things, chose to live the roaming life of hunters in the grasslands, hunting not only animals, but the oppressors, and also their Askaris, and found an early death at the end of the Liberator's road. We thought because of the change we had wrought, they too, in coming generations, would cease transmitting their foolish, destructive dreams to their children and allow them to grow again together with us. We were too generous in our thoughts. The disappointed Askaris cultivated secret wishes of destruction against us. These wishes they passed on to the first, the second, and third generation. Children walked among us, believing secretly there had been an age of giants and doers of great deeds now gone, and that those doers of great deeds had been their fathers' fathers. They heard secret, nostalgic tales of a time when a brave man had no need to do the careful, steady work of planting, watching, harvesting, but could, in one sudden, brilliant flash of violent energy, capture from others all the riches he craved, then, like a python, lie lazy through the length of coming seasons, consuming his victim's profit. Ah, that such unthinking ways could have power to lure so many people of our blood. We are the way itself. See, around us now, all the hurrying revelers running in directions just as bizarre, just as horrible, just as destructive. When the white predators from the desert came a second time, they found a brood of men ready to be tools of their purpose. This time again, the predators came with force to break our bodies. This time they came with guile also, a religion, to smash the feeblest minds among us, then turn them into tools against us all. The white men from the desert had made a discovery precious to predators and destroyers. The capture of the mind and the body, both is a slavery far longer lasting, far more secure than the conquest of bodies alone. Just as horrible, just as destructive. When the white predators from the desert came a second time, they found a brood of men ready to be tools of their purpose. This time again, the predators came with force to break our bodies. This time, they came with guile also, a religion, to smash the feeblest minds among us, then turn them into tools against us all. The white men from the desert had made a discovery precious to predators and destroyers. The capture of the mind and the body, both is a slavery far longer lasting, far more secure than the conquest of bodies alone.